to Pica Poco Kitchen. Today we're making machaca, or as my mom calls it, machaca. Vámonos! With its beginnings in the 18th century in the northern states of Mexico and the introduction of cattle, new methods to preserve meat were developed. Machaca, from the verb machacar, to mash, is a process where meat is thinly sliced, salted, dry under the sun, and then mashed with stones until fine threads. Popular in states like Sinaloa, Sonora, Chihuahua, Mexicali, Nuevo León, it is enjoyed in different varieties and with different meats like beef, venison, lamb, etc. Besides its fine grinding, another difference between machaca and the US jerky is that machaca is not considered as a dish on its own, but as a main ingredient which is later mixed and made into other dishes. With the exception of Nuevo León, where you can actually get bigger pieces of this dried meat and they can be enjoyed by themselves. So before we start, I do want you to have in mind that this process takes at least 2 days, so plan accordingly, but don't worry because I will show you what I did. I have here a 2 pound top round cut. Before we cut it, it is important to talk about meat grain. Grain is the natural direction in which the muscle fibers go. If we cut following the grain, we'll end up with a chewy and tough texture that retains moisture. In order to make machaca, we need to cut against the grain, which will give us a softer and tender texture that is easier to grind finer. And it will also be drier. As you can see, I'm cutting the meat as thin as I can. And talking about the meat, whenever making jerky or dry meats, I suggest you to stick with leaner cuts. Leaner cuts will dry out better and be easier to cut. Fat doesn't dehydrate, and since this is a preservation process, fat increases the chances of spoilage. So I'll say stick to tops and bottoms, like top sirloin, top round, bottom round, flat steak, skirt, tenderloin, and even brisket. Once that all your meat is cut, I suggest you to keep the little pieces and make a little snack for yourself. Now we're gonna prepare our meat, and to do so we're gonna use salt. I'm using coarse sea salt, but you can use whichever you prefer. Salt is gonna help us with four important things. Number one is gonna extract the moisture by drawing out all the juices from the meat. It is also going to potentiate the flavors because it releases a brine that is reabsorbed by the meat. It also breaks the proteins of the meat, giving it a tender texture. And of course, preservation, because salt inhibits bacterial growth. Make sure to salt your meat both sides. To allow the salt do its thing, we're gonna put our meat in a container, cover it, and leave it in our fridge overnight, preferably. If you don't have that much time, at least do it for 2 hours. After your meat has been resting in the fridge, you're gonna take it out and we want to remove the excess moisture in it. So I'm gonna use the help of some paper towels to pat dry it all before I set it up for the dehydrator. And you have many options of drying your meat. You could use a dehydrator, an oven, or a smoker. I suggest you to go to the recipe booklet of your machine and find out what their suggestions for the time and temperatures are best. I'm going to give you some approximations, but once again, it can be different on your specific machine. I'm gonna set mine in the dehydrator for 6 hours at 165 Fahrenheit. That's what the booklet of my dehydrator suggested, and it worked perfectly. If you're gonna do it in your oven, it can take between 6 to 8 hours at a temperature between 145 and 170 Fahrenheit. If you're using a smoker, depending on the weight of your meat, it can take from 3 to 10 hours at a temperature between 160 and 200 Fahrenheit. Please do your own research to see what works best for you. And here's my meat. As you can hear, it's dehydrated. And now I'm going to mash it. And don't worry, I'm not gonna go stone to stone mashing. I'm gonna use my food processor. And even though it's already in strips, I'm gonna cut it into smaller pieces to help my food processor. So let's do that. And this is how my dehydrated meat looks. Here, you'll see me wasting my time cutting my meat in even pieces for no reason and no need using the knife. But I'm stubborn like that. Not even after grabbing a piece and tearing it up with my bare hands. And here you'll see how well dehydrated it is, that it just falls apart as easy as that. But there I am, going back to the knife like an idiot. Oh well. Now, I am not cutting it in pieces for no reason. I am trying to make it smaller so my food processor struggles less. When cutting it, another thing that it is important to remember is that if you still see some bits of fats, it would be nice to remove them, not just because they won't grind, also to avoid the risk of spoilage. In the end, we want our meat to be preserved well. Here I go and finally learn my lesson, and now I'm just gonna use my hands. You'll see how easy and faster I finished the whole batch of meat. Depending on your food processor, you may want to do this part in batches. I trusted my very sturdy food processor, so I added it all in one, but I did cut everything in smaller pieces. You want to use the pulse function first, a couple of times, before moving onto the grinding setting. If you think that your food processor is struggling, you want to stop and add a little at a time to avoid overheating your machine. And here it is. You can see what I meant when I said thread-like. It already smells delicious. I can't wait to prepare it. And because machaca is from the north, we're gonna enjoy it the northern way with flour tortillas. I already have a video on how to make basic flour tortillas in my channel, but these ones are a step up. And for them, you're gonna need 2 cups of flour, 1 teaspoon of salt. This is half a cup of milk plus half a cup of water that we're going to warm up, 90 grams of room temp butter, and 1 or half a teaspoon of baking powder. I prefer going half a teaspoon, but it's up to you. For your flour tortillas, start in a bowl with your flour and add your salt and baking powder. Mix well, and we're gonna continue by adding the butter. Just don't do it as dramatically as I did to avoid making a mess. Using your fingers, you're gonna smoosh and smoosh until you get a sand-like consistency. Once the butter is well incorporated, you can add your liquids. Remember that the liquid amount will always vary depending on many factors, like the temperature and humidity of your room, the flour type, etc. I ended up using only half of all my liquids. It is better always to add a little at a time. If you feel like you added too much, then you can always correct by adding a little bit more flour. But be careful, and stop when you feel the right consistency of your dough. And at this point, of course, you can move it to your surface and start kneading it until you get a nice and soft ball. Now, I'm gonna cover it and let it rest for around 15 minutes. After that time, your dough should be ready for cutting and shaping. I've told you before that I famously make ugly tortillas, but making flour tortillas is just like making bread. It takes practice, and the more you make them, the better they'll turn out. And also, the more things you learn in the process. Like in this case, I should have gone for my regular 8 pieces, but I decided that I wanted them bigger. So I ended up with thick tortillas instead of thin as I wanted them, because you can make them only as big as your pan. Anyway, another thing that I've learned is that by handling the tortillas with my fingers, it makes them stretch out funny. So finally, I figured it out and I cut open a big plastic bag and sprinkle a little bit of flour on it. I'm gonna start by helping myself with my tortilla press and then go straight over with my rolling pin without taking my tortilla off the plastic bag. That will help me move it straight to the pan without too much handling and misshaping. If you're lucky enough to have one of those big tortilla press, then by all means help yourself with it and then decide if you want to keep flattening it and making your tortilla bigger or not. And of course, if you have any other tips that you can provide, I'll happily take them. So far, this technique worked decently. I still don't make the prettiest, but hey, this is not a beauty contest. Now the transferring of my tortilla to the hot pan is easier. You'll have to use your hand and arm depending on how big it is. Cook it in your hot pan and just flip it once. You want to make sure that the surface has enough bubbles. That means that it's ready to be flipped, just like in here. And even though they are not as thin as I wanted them, they definitely are flexible and soft. With meat and tortillas ready, it's time to cook the machaca. A popular way is a la mexicana. In a pan with oil, I'm going to fry some garlic and onion, and then I'm going to add my machaca. I used approximately a third of it, and that was good enough for 4 well-served burritos. I added 1 serrano pepper, but you can use a jalapeno instead. I also add 2 diced Roma tomatoes. If you want your machaca to be juicier, I suggest you to blend another couple of tomatoes and add that juice in. Trust me, it will go fantastic. Some people like to rehydrate their machaca before cooking to have better control of the seasoning. I normally don't, but then I do not add any more salt to my dish. Machaca's ready, so let's make some burritos. First, I spread some beans in the middle of my tortilla and then add some machaca. I wanted them to be substantial, so I made sure that there was enough meat in each one of my burritos. Start rolling and checking them out, and if you think that they can hold more, then add more. It's dinner time after all. Once you have your burrito rolled up, then make sure you have your pan heating up, and let's put this baby on the pan to get it golden and warm. Once it is to your liking, take it out and it's ready to serve. As always, add whatever ingredients you like and serve them however you wish. Just check out this cross section right here. Delicious. And here you have it. Enjoy it in burritos a la mexicana with some beans. I'm definitely gonna be having some huevos con machaca tomorrow morning. And every time I have machaca, it makes me think of my beautiful family from Sinaloa that I love so much. And the important part is that now you can make it too. And I hope you do. And it doesn't matter if you say machaca or machaca. I hope you like mucho this machaca. Make it and share it with your friends. Just like this video, like, subscribe, and be notified. And for more, follow me on the socials. Adiós, amigues.